Marcus Gray stepped off the crowded city bus just outside the gleaming glass doors of Fioravance, one of the most prestigious and high-end luxury boutiques on the East Coast. Despite the early morning sun casting gentle gold across the sidewalk, everything else felt cold and a bit distant. He glanced around, noting the pristine window displays, mannequins draped in finely tailored suits, carefully posed to exude confidence, grace, and a subtle kind of power. Marcus had passed by Fioravance countless times on his way to work, but today was different. Today, he had a reason to enter. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and remembered the nights spent hunched over his drawing desk. His mother's voice echoed in his mind, reminding him that belief in his own talent was paramount. As a child, he'd made sketches of suits, jackets, and shoes, always dreaming of designing something truly eye-catching. Back then, his mother had done her best to encourage him, despite the financial hardships they faced. Now, at 29, Marcus had built a promising portfolio. He was no longer just a dreamer. He had become a freelance fashion designer, determined to make his mark. Though he felt confident about his work, Marcus was painfully aware of his surroundings. The area around Fioravance was known for wealth, men and women in bespoke outfits, sporting watches that cost more than the average year's rent. A wave of self-consciousness hit him. He had donned the best outfit he owned, a crisp white button-down shirt, tailored charcoal trousers, and polished black loafers that still gleamed from an hour of careful buffing the night before. Yet, stepping up to the store's massive, shining doors, he felt a twinge of anxiety. Would anyone here take him seriously? He mustered his courage and entered. A rush of artificially cooled air greeted him, along with a mild floral scent that hinted at a new cologne sample wafting near the entrance. The interior was everything he expected: polished marble floors, chandeliers that cast a warm glow on carefully arranged clothing racks, and a subtle hush in the air that spoke of exclusivity. Every item seemed meticulously placed, with price tags that might have been best left unseen. Soft classical music played in the background, reinforcing the sense that this was a space reserved for the elite. Marcus paused near a display of intricately patterned ties, mentally noting the craftsmanship. He'd studied dozens of designs before finalizing his own tie collection. He had come here hoping to pitch his concepts. He wasn't naive enough to think this would be simple. But he had an acquaintance, a man he met during a small local fashion event, who had once told him that Fioravance manager, Mr. Beecham, was always on the lookout for fresh talent. Marcus clung to that single spark of hope. He noticed two sales associates behind a counter, a statuesque woman in a sleek black dress and a tall man with stylishly slicked back hair. Both looked up, almost in unison, the moment Marcus walked in. Their eyes lingered on him. Something in their expressions made Marcus instantly uncomfortable. There was a momentary flash of suspicion, or perhaps disdain, that flickered across their faces before they replaced it with polite, practiced smiles. He had seen that look before countless times in restaurants, shops, or corporate offices, where people's eyes sized him up before they spoke a word. Undeterred, Marcus approached. "Good morning," he said politely, offering a small smile. "I'm here to see Mr. Beecham. I have a portfolio I'd like to show him." He spoke softly but clearly, trying to project the confidence he wished he felt. The male associate raised an eyebrow, his gaze drifting to Marcus's shoes, as though searching for scuff marks. "Is he expecting you?" the associate asked with a clipped tone that was polite but lacked genuine warmth. Marcus wasn't sure how to respond. He hadn't been able to arrange a formal meeting, but he'd hoped that maybe if he spoke with someone in person, they might allow him just a few minutes of Mr. Beauchamp's time. "No, sir," Marcus said, "but I was advised that he might be interested in reviewing new designs." He carefully pulled out a sleek binder from his messenger bag. "I have sketches of men's accessories, ties, and some prototypes. It would only take a few minutes." "Mr. Beecham doesn't take walk-ins," the female associate said with a forced smile. She narrowed her eyes, scanning Marcus in a way that seemed meant to diminish him. "If you want to speak with our manager, you'd need a scheduled appointment. And even then, we typically only see established designers." Marcus swallowed back the sting of her words and tried to keep his composure. "I understand," he replied. "Could I possibly leave my portfolio with you? Or get an email address where I can send a few images?" The female associate flicked her gaze toward the binder, as though it were an unremarkable trinket. "We're quite busy," she said. "Perhaps you should look into smaller boutiques if you're trying to build connections." Marcus forced a nod. Disappointment gnawed at him. "Thank you," he managed. "I appreciate your time." He turned away, unsure of what else to do. Part of him wanted to insist on leaving his binder, but he sensed it would likely get tossed aside. As he stepped away from the counter, he scanned the store, trying to see if there might be someone else to approach, maybe an assistant manager or a friendlier staff member. A pang of frustration hit him. He knew that in large part, their hostility was about more than just him having no appointment. He could feel it in their dismissive tone, the appraising look that suggested he didn't belong in their pristine world. It was a feeling he'd learned to recognize over time. He inhaled, fighting the urge to leave. He had told himself repeatedly that, no matter what, he wouldn't just walk out at the first sign of rejection. "Come on," he thought. "You've come this far." He slowly walked deeper into the boutique, moving past suits arranged on mannequins, trying to get a sense of the store's aesthetic in real life rather than from photos. The craftsmanship was indisputably stunning. Silk pocket squares, intricately woven ties, soft leather belts, all displayed like prized works of art. As Marcus moved further in, another staff member, a middle-aged woman with rimless glasses, approached him. "May I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone a bit more neutral, though it contained the same undercurrent of skepticism. He offered a polite smile. "I'd like to speak to someone in purchasing or management if possible," he said quietly, adjusting his bag. "I'm a designer, and I have something that might interest Mr. Beecham." Her eyes flicked to a tablet in her hands. "Do you have an appointment?" Marcus braced himself and repeated, "No appointment, but I came hoping he might spare a moment." She tilted her head, made a note on her tablet, and gave him a look that bordered on pity. "He's in a meeting right now with a client," she said. "If you wait, perhaps I can see if he'll have a moment later." But no promises. Marcus felt a small surge of gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate any help you can provide." He settled into a chair near the fitting rooms. Classical music still played softly, but his heartbeat thudded louder in his ears. He was aware of sideways glances from a few other staffers. He tried to focus on maintaining good posture, controlling his breathing, reminding himself that he deserved to be here, even if he wasn't wearing a $5,000 watch or carrying a platinum credit card. Time inched by. He checked his phone surreptitiously, noticing that an hour had passed. He tried not to feel disheartened. "Be patient," he told himself. "This is how you break in." He recalled the stories of other designers who'd faced rejection after rejection before finally catching a break. After another half hour, the middle-aged staff member reappeared. "Mr. Beecham is still busy," she said, looking vaguely apologetic. "I'm not sure he'll have time to see you today." Marcus took a moment to gather himself. "I understand," he said softly, rising from the chair. "Could I leave my portfolio and contact information? I can come back another time." "I'll see what I can do," she replied, carefully taking his binder in her hands. For a moment, she seemed to consider him as a person, not just a random visitor. "I'll make sure Mr. Beecham sees it, or at least hears about it. But I can't guarantee anything." Marcus offered her a grateful smile. "Thank you so much," he said, scribbling his name, email, and phone number on a piece of paper. "I appreciate you giving me a chance." He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, he heard a commotion behind him. A sharp female voice barked, "Hold on a minute. That's store property." He spun around to see the female associate from before gesturing at him, an accusatory glare on her face. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, puzzled. "Check his bag," she demanded, her tone loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "He was wandering around the store, and we can't be too careful. I saw him near the accessory section. Some items are missing." Marcus's heart thundered in his chest. "I haven't taken anything," he said, forcing himself to remain calm, though panic began to rise. This was the exact kind of humiliating situation he had always dreaded. The tall male associate from earlier approached, looking smug. "We noticed you were spending a lot of time looking at the ties. The staff can't locate one of the new silk designs that arrived. Perhaps you should open your bag so we can clear this up." Marcus felt his face grow hot, both from anger and embarrassment. He saw customers whispering and watching. One older man with silver hair frowned at the scene, while a young couple looked uncertain about what was happening. The middle-aged staff member with rimless glasses seemed taken aback, but she didn't intervene right away. Marcus had to swallow a bitter lump in his throat, recalling similar humiliations in other stores. He wanted to shout, "I didn't do anything." But he knew that would only make the situation worse. Instead, he calmly said, "I didn't take anything. But if you need to look, then here." He set his messenger bag on the marble floor and unzipped it. He pulled out his laptop, his notepad, some personal items, and at the bottom, the 2 prototypes of ties he had brought for his presentation. "These are my designs," he said, his voice trembling with both rage and vulnerability. "If you're looking for your store's items, they're not in here." The female associate bent down, grabbing one of his prototype ties, her manicured fingers pinching the silk suspiciously. These are definitely not ours," she murmured. She gave him a hard look. "We have to be sure. We can't let things walk out the door." She dropped the tie back into his bag, and her mouth twitched into a condescending half-smile. "We'll take your word for it this time." Marcus could barely breathe, humiliated at being treated like a potential thief. He wasn't sure whether to pick up his bag and run or stand his ground. Despair mingled with fury. He wondered if anyone in the store would stand up for him, or if they all thought of him as some suspicious character the moment he walked in. Suddenly, a quiet voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" A man in a tailored navy suit with subtle pinstripes stepped forward. He had a neat goatee and exuded an air of quiet authority. Marcus recognized him from pictures online. This was Mr. Beecham. The manager had arrived, and the entire store seemed to sense it. The associates straightened up instantly. The tall male associate spoke first. "Mr. Beecham, we thought this gentleman might have taken a tie." Mr. Beecham held up a hand, silencing him. His attention shifted to Marcus, scanning the items laid out on the floor. Then he noticed the prototypes. "Whose designs are these?" he asked, his expression turning curious. "They're mine," Marcus replied, struggling to keep his voice level. "I came in hoping to show them to you, to see if you might be interested in collaborating or purchasing. I don't have an appointment, so I tried to leave my portfolio." The female associate tried to interject, but Mr. Beecham cut her off again. "I see." He bent down, picked up one of Marcus's ties, and ran his fingers over the fabric. His expression remained calm, but there was a flicker of interest in his eyes. "Did you design this?" Marcus nodded. "I did. I have sketches, too." He gestured to his binder, which the middle-aged staff member was still holding. Mr. Beecham rose, tie in hand. "So you're a designer," he said, "and my staff was accusing you of theft." There was a detectable note of disapproval in his voice. The tall male associate cleared his throat. "We lost track of a tie, sir, and we were just trying to be vigilant." Marcus clenched his jaw, not wanting to speak out of turn, but feeling the anger threaten to boil over. Mr. Beecham seemed to sense the tension. "Is the missing tie accounted for now?" he asked the associates. The female associate nodded, trying to mask her unease. "It seems there may have been a misunderstanding. We found it in a different display area." Mr. Beauchamp's eyes narrowed. A misunderstanding indeed. He turned to Marcus, his tone shifting to something more professional. "Come with me to my office. Let's talk about your designs." Relief and indignation swirled inside Marcus. While he was grateful Mr. Beecham was giving him the time of day, he couldn't forget the humiliation of the past few minutes. Still, he gathered his items, took a breath, and followed the manager through the store into a back hallway that led to a polished glass door. Inside, the office was tastefully decorated with modern art and a large mahogany desk. Mr. Beecham gestured for Marcus to sit on a leather chair. He sat behind the desk, placing the prototype tie in front of him. "May I see your portfolio?" he asked, extending a hand. Marcus passed it over, trying to steady his breathing. He watched as the manager flipped through each page. The room fell into near silence, punctuated only by the gentle hum of the air conditioning. Every so often, Mr. Beecham paused, studying a specific sketch of a tie or a concept for a pattern scarf. "So you specialize in accessories?" Mr. Beecham said after a few minutes. "For now," Marcus replied. "I design suits too, but I found more traction in men's accessories. I love experimenting with color, texture, and subtle patterns." Mr. Beecham set the portfolio on the desk, interlocking his fingers. "Your work is impressive, unique, but not too outlandish. I could see some of these ties fitting with our more fashion-forward lines." Marcus's heart lifted. "Thank you," he said quietly. The manager leaned back in his chair. "I'm going to be honest. We typically source from established brands, but I do keep an eye out for emerging talent. Given the industry's direction, fresh ideas are welcome. If you're open to it, we might consider a limited run of your designs for a trial. But before we get into details that's seen out there with my staff," he paused, choosing his words carefully. "I apologize for the way you were treated." Marcus let out a tense breath. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate you acknowledging that." Mr. Beecham nodded, a flicker of regret crossing his face. "I don't condone my staff jumping to conclusions about any customer. Let me assure you, their behavior will be addressed." Marcus pressed his lips together. He didn't want to sabotage a potential opportunity by sounding confrontational, but he also couldn't pretend it was just a minor slip-up. "I understand store security. I get that. But that's not what happened here," he said softly. "I wasn't just a suspect. I felt singled out." Mr. Beecham listened, his expression growing more serious. "Understood. We'll handle it internally. And if you decide to work with us, I hope you'll see a change in attitude." Marcus nodded, feeling a mix of relief and lingering anger. He tried to push past it. "I'd be excited to collaborate," he said. "I want to share my vision with a store that values craftsmanship." Mr. Beecham picked up the prototype tie again. "For now, let's talk about this. Tell me about the fabric choice and pattern design." Marcus leaned forward, passion infusing his voice as he described the inspiration behind the swirling geometric patterns that paid homage to West African textiles he had studied in college. He explained the subtle color gradients, the choice of silk weave, and the minimal sheen he preferred to keep the ties sophisticated without being flashy. Mr. Beecham asked questions, and Marcus answered with clarity. The conversation flowed, each question building on the last. In that moment, Marcus forgot the humiliating scene outside and focused on the craft, the art, and the pride in his work. After nearly an hour of discussion, Mr. Beecham said, "All right, I'd like to have a sample run, maybe a dozen ties, to test them with a select group of our clients who appreciate new talent. If they sell well, we'll talk about expanding. Of course, we'll work out a fair arrangement. Does that sound reasonable?" Marcus's eyes lit up. "It does," he said, feeling a rush of excitement. "I can start on those immediately. Thank you so much for giving me a chance." Mr. Beecham opened his desk drawer, pulling out a business card. "Here's my direct number and email. Shoot me your proposal with cost estimates, production timelines, and we'll move from there." Marcus took the card reverently, a beaming smile threatening to break across his face. "Absolutely. I'll send everything in the next day or two." They stood, shook hands, and Mr. Beecham led him back to the main floor. The same associates were there, wearing tight smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Mr. Beauchamp's expression turned stern. "Please see Mr. Gray out properly," he said, "and ensure his comfort if he returns." The staff murmured polite acknowledgments. Marcus almost wanted to say something sarcastic, to point out how quickly they'd changed their tune now that he had Mr. Beauchamp's approval. Instead, he left with a small nod, not wishing to sour his newfound opportunity. Outside, the city felt warmer, brighter. He allowed himself a moment to savor the victory, thinking of his mother and how proud she would be. His phone buzzed. It was a message from a friend asking how the pitch went. He grinned, typed back, "Just made a deal. Small scale, but it's a start." Over the following week, Marcus worked tirelessly on completing sketches, sourcing high-quality silk, and perfecting the details. He emailed Mr. Beecham, receiving prompt replies. True to his word, the manager seemed genuinely interested, not only in seeing Marcus's ties, but also in hearing his broader design ideas. Despite the progress, the memory of that humiliating moment in the store lingered. He tried to push it aside, but it surfaced again when he stepped into the boutique the following Monday for a formal meeting. A swirl of emotions overtook him, a mixture of excitement for the potential business deal and dread at seeing those same staff members. He arrived dressed in one of his personal suits, a slender fit, deep gray, with black trim. It was a suit he designed himself, though he hadn't had the capital to produce it for sale yet. Confidence radiated from him, but a coil of tension tightened in his gut. The female associate from before locked eyes with him when he entered, her expression guarded, as though uncertain how to act. This time, Marcus walked straight to the desk, a calm dignity in his stance. "Good afternoon," he said. "I have an appointment with Mr. Beecham." The female associate mustered a polite smile, an improvement from her prior hostility. "Yes, he's expecting you," she said. "Would you like any refreshments while you wait?" Her tone was drastically more accommodating, which might have felt satisfying if it wasn't so obviously forced. "I'm fine, thank you," Marcus replied. He took a seat, and soon enough, Mr. Beecham emerged from the back to greet him. They headed to his office together, the manager casting a pointed glance at the associates, a subtle reminder of their previous behavior. Once in the privacy of the office, Marcus presented the newly finished sample ties. 6 designs, 2 copies of each, carefully packaged. Mr. Beecham examined them with enthusiasm. "These are even better in person," he said. "I've shown some of your sketches to a few of our loyal patrons, and they're intrigued. Let's get these on display next week. We'll do a small spotlight featuring emerging designer Marcus Gray. We can also roll out limited marketing on our social channels." Marcus could hardly believe it. "That's incredible," he said, voice a little shaky with excitement. "I can't thank you enough for this chance." Mr. Beauchamp's phone rang, and he excused himself to answer, leaving Marcus alone for a moment. A wave of relief passed over him. He was actually making headway in one of the most prestigious boutiques around. And yet, in the pit of his stomach, he realized how precarious everything still felt. He was black, from a modest background, stepping into a realm where stereotypes and biases still ran deep. He vowed to remain professional, to let his work speak for itself, but also to stay true to who he was. After the call, Mr. Beecham ended their meeting with a firm handshake. "I'll have our official contract drafted and sent to you by tomorrow. But for now, consider this partnership official," he said with a smile. Marcus left Fioravance that day walking taller, imagining the future. He pictured the day his brand might be well known enough that he'd hire staff of his own, people he'd train to treat every customer, every designer, with respect, no matter what they looked like. In the weeks that followed, the ties were quietly introduced to select clientele. Mr. Beecham sent Marcus updates, letting him know which patterns were selling quickly, which ones needed restocking, and inviting him back periodically for discussions on expanding the line. Marcus's world began to shift, one phone call and one email at a time. Magazine stylists inquired about his background. A few social media influencers posted pictures of his ties, praising the quality and unique designs. With each small success, Marcus remembered the day he was accused of theft in that very boutique. He refused to let resentment consume him, but he used the memory to stay grounded. If he wanted to bring real change to the industry, he'd have to be persistent, professional, and unafraid to address biases head-on. Eventually, Mr. Beecham organized a small in-store event to introduce Marcus to regular VIP clients. Marcus was both thrilled and nervous. High-profile guests often attended these gatherings: actors, business moguls, media personalities. On the appointed day, Marcus arrived early, wearing one of his newest designs, a deep burgundy tie with a subtle silver filigree pattern. He had also worn the suit that he'd tailor-made for himself, and for the first time in a long time, he felt completely confident in his appearance. Inside Fioravance, staff scrambled to prepare the space for the event, arranging champagne flutes, finalizing displays, and adjusting lighting. Mr. Beecham greeted Marcus warmly, leading him to a small station where some of his ties were prominently featured on velvet-lined stands. A placard reading Marcus Gray, featured designer, stood in front. Marcus took in the sight, heart pounding with gratitude and excitement. As the guests trickled in, Marcus did his best to greet them politely, explaining his design inspirations and technique. He felt the rush of being recognized for his work, not for his background or the color of his skin. Polite conversation flowed, and soon the boutique buzzed with a sense of celebration. Marcus glimpsed the tall male associate in the distance, looking uncomfortable, as though he was reminded of how he had once humiliated the man who was now the event star. The female associate stood by display, also glancing occasionally at Marcus with an unreadable expression. Amid the crowd, an older gentleman with refined features approached, wearing a tailored navy suit. His hair was silver, and he carried himself with quiet confidence. "Young man, I've been hearing wonderful things about your ties," he said, picking one up to examine. "This color palette is exquisite." Marcus smiled genuinely. "Thank you, sir. I'm delighted you like it." The man inspected the tie. "I'm the CEO of a consulting firm nearby. I'd love to discuss the possibility of ordering custom ties for my senior partners. A uniform look for a new branding campaign. Do you take commissions?" Marcus felt his heart leap. "I certainly do," he said. "We can coordinate patterns and color schemes that match your firm's branding." They exchanged business cards. Before the man stepped away, he patted Marcus on the shoulder. "I'll be in touch. Expect a sizable order if all goes well." Marcus watched him go, hardly believing this was real. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the female associate approaching with hesitant steps. She seemed to be struggling with something internally before speaking in a low voice, so no one else would overhear. "Mr. Gray, she paused, folding her arms. "Congratulations on your feature here. The ties are lovely." He took a moment to respond. Her tone was reserved, yet it carried a hint of sincerity. "Thank you," he replied, meeting her gaze. She glanced around to ensure no one else was listening. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about what happened before. I was wrong to assume things." A pink flush crept into her cheeks, and she spoke quietly, almost grudgingly. "We've had issues with theft, but that doesn't excuse what we did. I hope you know that." Marcus felt a mixture of emotions, anger, vindication, and unexpected pity. But mostly, he felt relief that at least someone acknowledged the wrongdoing. "Thank you for saying that," he said softly. "I appreciate it." She nodded, her eyes flicking downward in discomfort. "Anyway, congratulations," she repeated, then hurried back to her post. Marcus exhaled, feeling the weight of that entire event lift, if only a little. He hadn't needed her apology, but receiving it reminded him that change was possible, even if it came begrudgingly. The evening wore on, and Mr. Beecham introduced Marcus to more VIP guests. A local socialite, a young tech entrepreneur, and even a movie star who happened to be passing through the city all expressed interest in his ties. The success of the event was beyond anything Marcus had hoped for. At one point, the older man with silver hair who had witnessed the accusation the first day approached Marcus. "We didn't get properly introduced," he said gently. "I remember the day you first came in here, and, well, I'm glad to see you're getting the recognition you deserve." Marcus felt a lump in his throat, recalling how that man had watched it all unfold. He extended his hand. "Marcus Gray, thank you for saying that." The older man shook his hand warmly. "Winston Caldwell," he said. "I've been a regular here for ages. I'm sorry I didn't speak up that day. It all happened so quickly, and I wasn't sure how to intervene. But I saw the way you handled yourself. Composure, dignity. Not many people could keep calm in that situation." Marcus appreciated the sincerity. "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Sometimes it's all you can do," he said, with a faint smile. Mr. Caldwell nodded. "I know the manager well. Beecham is a decent man, but some of his staff, well, they still have a lot to learn. If you ever need a connection or assistance, let me know." He handed Marcus a business card. I run a philanthropic organization, among other things. I'd love to feature you in our next fundraiser event, perhaps a fashion segment." Marcus's eyes widened. "That's incredibly kind of you. We'll be in touch," Mr. Caldwell said. With that, he left Marcus feeling both shocked and excited at the prospect of further opportunities. The night had become a stepping stone, not just for ties in a boutique, but for bigger aspirations. Eventually, the event wound down. Staff collected empty champagne glasses, and guests trickled out into the night. Marcus remained near his display, reveling in the afterglow of the night's success. Mr. Beecham approached, looking pleased. "That went exceptionally well," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "We sold a good number of your ties tonight. We'll need to discuss restocking soon." Marcus grinned. "That's fantastic. I'm honored to be part of Fire Events." Mr. Beecham smiled back, though his expression grew thoughtful. "Marcus, I hope you know we value you, your talent, and we want to make sure you continue to feel welcome here. Unfortunately, there's still some tension from that day, and from what you may have experienced with certain staff members. I want to assure you changes are being made. Sensitivity training, a few staff realignments. I'm committed to ensuring that what happened to you never happens again to any customer or visiting designer." Marcus felt gratitude welling up. "I'm glad to hear that," he said, voice catching slightly. "I do appreciate it. If there's anything I can do to help even share my perspective with the team, I'm open." Mr. Beecham nodded. "That might be something to consider. Let's talk more next week. For now, celebrate tonight's success." Marcus left the store that evening carrying the unsold sample ties in a polished box labeled with Fire Events logo, a powerful symbol of how far he'd come. As he walked home, he was buoyed by a deep sense of accomplishment, tempered by the knowledge that prejudice remained, lurking beneath polished exteriors. Yet he found solace in how quickly perceptions could change when given the chance to see beyond stereotypes. Over the next few weeks, business inquiries flooded his inbox. The store's social media post featuring Marcus's designs had been shared widely, drawing the attention of fashion enthusiasts and local publications. A small fashion magazine invited him for an interview, which he prepared for diligently. He'd talk about his design process, his inspirations, and hopefully slip in a message about inclusion and opportunity in the fashion world. One afternoon, he received a call from Mr. Beecham with unexpected news. "Marcus, I just got word that a well-known singer is stopping by to look for custom stage outfits, and he specifically asked if we had any rising designers in-house. I mentioned you. He's coming in tomorrow afternoon. Think you can make it?" Marcus's mind raced. "Absolutely," he said, trying to contain his excitement. The opportunity to design stage attire for a famous singer could catapult his career to another level. He spent the evening preparing sketches that might appeal to a performer, focusing on bold patterns, interesting textures, and statement pieces that still adhered to Marcus's refined aesthetic. The next day, Marcus arrived at Fire Events with a small suitcase of fabric swatches and sample pieces. The singer, John Savage, a Randy sensation known for his dynamic style, arrived surrounded by assistants and a few close friends. He was outgoing, friendly, and surprisingly humble for someone so successful. "Marcus, right?" he said, greeting him with a handshake. "Mr. Beecham showed me some of your work online, and I was really impressed. I'm thinking something edgy yet elegant for my next tour." Marcus's nerves fizzled with excitement. "I have some ideas," he said, displaying a few sketches that incorporated metallic accents and vibrant, swirling designs reminiscent of Marcus's previous patterns. John Savage nodded enthusiastically, pointing to elements he liked. Before they could delve too deep, one of John's assistants motioned for him to take a call. "I'll be right back," the singer promised, stepping aside. Marcus looked around, noticing the staff giving him more respectful, admiring looks than ever. A wave of satisfaction mingled with relief. He was no longer just the black guy with the suspicious bag. He was Marcus Gray, the talented designer with big-name clients interested in his work. When John Savage returned, he told Marcus, "I have to cut this visit short, but I'd love to see more ideas. Let's schedule a proper sit-down soon." I want you to design some pieces for my next concert. Are you cool with that?" Marcus nearly beamed. "Yes, absolutely," he said, exchanging contact information and finalizing some next steps with the singer's team. As John Savage exited, a small entourage of paparazzi and excited fans snapped photos outside. The store's staff buzzed with excitement. Marcus's collaboration with a star would reflect brilliantly on Fior events as well. After the singer departed, Mr. Beecham shook Marcus's hand again, exuding genuine pride in the new partnership. "I can't say enough how happy I am we discovered your talent," he said warmly. "And I'm glad we got past that initial misunderstanding." Marcus nodded. The memory still stung, but he was no longer controlled by it. "I appreciate it," he replied. "Thank you for giving me the platform." In the days that followed, word spread about Marcus's potential collaboration with John Savage. Meanwhile, more orders for ties poured in from the store's clientele. Marcus found himself working tirelessly but happily, filling custom requests, refining designs, and even hiring a small team of local seamstresses to handle the surge in demand. He moved into a modest but functional studio downtown, where he could hang up mood boards, store fabric rolls, and hold meetings with new clients. One rainy afternoon, while finalizing a new design, Marcus's phone buzzed. An email popped up from a well-known national fashion magazine. They wanted to feature him in a piece about rising black designers challenging industry norms. The publication had heard about his ties at Fior events and the pending collaboration with John Savage. The editor wrote, "We're moved by your story, especially the adversity you overcame in that boutique. Would you be open to an interview discussing that experience and how it shaped you?" Marcus stared at the screen, recalling the embarrassment, the anger, and the sense of triumph that followed. He had a decision to make. Did he want to publicly recount how he'd been accused of theft? Would it overshadow his work, turning him into a symbol instead of a designer? After a few moments of thought, he realized that sharing his story might spark a conversation about prejudice, empathy, and resilience. He typed out a response. "I'd be honored. Let's schedule it." The next week, a journalist and photographer visited his studio. The journalist asked about his background, inspirations, and design philosophy. Then came the harder questions. "We heard you had a racially charged incident at Fior events. Can you elaborate on what happened?" Marcus took a breath, describing the scene truthfully. How he was told Mr. Beecham wasn't seeing visitors, how the staff accused him of stealing, and how eventually Mr. Beecham stepped in. But he also spoke of how the boutique had transformed once they recognized his talent. "I think it's important to highlight that while prejudice still exists, people can learn," he said. "Mr. Beecham and his team are now championing my designs. The fact that they made room for me to be here, to succeed, is evidence that growth is possible." By the end of the interview, Marcus felt both exhausted and liberated. The photographer snapped shots of him in his studio, wearing one of his signature ties, leaning against a mannequin draped in a half-finished suit. He hoped the final article would do more than highlight his personal success. He wanted it to inspire others, especially those who'd been judged unfairly or had big dreams but faced daunting barriers. When the magazine article went live, it sparked widespread interest. Blogs, social media accounts, and even local news stations picked it up. Marcus's inbox exploded with messages, some from people praising him as an inspiration, others from fellow designers who felt similarly marginalized. Orders for his tie soared, and even customers from overseas reached out to inquire about shipping rates. Within Fior events, the effect was palpable. More diverse clientele felt welcomed, inspired by Marcus's story. Sales associates were instructed to approach everyone with courtesy, a direct result of the store's new policies. Mr. Beecham admitted to Marcus in private that, while not all employees took the sensitivity training seriously at first, they began to see its importance when customers referenced the article, praising the store for doing the right thing by supporting Marcus. Slowly, the atmosphere changed, and while it wasn't perfect, it was noticeably better. As the months rolled on, Marcus juggled multiple projects. His tie lines at Fior events, the custom order for John Savage, and smaller commissions from local businesses. He also committed a portion of his earnings to community programs that supported young artists from underprivileged backgrounds, kids who, like him, had big dreams but limited support. In turn, he often invited some of those aspiring designers to visit his studio, offering guidance, sharing resources, and reminding them that their talent was worth nurturing. One rainy evening, after a long day of work, Marcus decided to stop by Fioravant's unannounced, just to see how his designs were being displayed. He wore casual clothes, a soft sweater, dark jeans, and a comfortable pair of sneakers, nothing too flashy. The store was near closing time, and only a few customers remained. A young sales associate, someone Marcus had never met before, greeted him with a bright smile. "Welcome to Fioravant's," she said. "Is there anything special you're looking for this evening?" Marcus was momentarily taken aback by the warmth in her voice. It felt genuine, a far cry from his first encounter months ago. "Just browsing," he said with a polite smile, stepping past displays of suits and ties. His eyes lit up when he saw a small stand of his newest tie collection, featuring bold geometric patterns that had garnered buzz online. A sign above it read, "Marcus Gray's Limited Collection." It was surreal to see his name displayed so prominently in a store he once felt unwelcome in. As he admired the display, Mr. Beecham appeared. "Marcus," he greeted, leaning in to shake his hand. "I didn't know you were stopping by." Marcus shrugged good-naturedly. "Just wanted to see how the new collection looks in-store." "It's beautiful." The manager nodded. "They're selling well, too. We'll need to talk about restocks." Marcus grinned, proud of how far they'd both come. "Sounds like a good problem to have." Mr. Beecham studied Marcus for a moment. "You know, I'm glad this partnership worked out. You've brought new energy to Fioravant's, but more importantly, you opened my eyes." A flicker of emotion passed over Marcus's face. "I appreciate you saying that," he replied, remembering the day Mr. Beecham apologized for his staff's behavior. "I hope I can continue to live up to the trust you've placed in me." Mr. Beecham gave a small smile and lowered his voice. "You already have. And you've taught us all a lesson about not jumping to conclusions." His gaze drifted to a corner of the store where the tall male associate was folding shirts, eyes occasionally flicking over to Marcus. Gone was the contempt in his expression. Now, there was a mixture of respect and perhaps regret. Marcus felt a quiet sense of validation. As he prepared to leave, Marcus passed by a newer display featuring women's handbags and accessories. A mother and daughter were browsing, the daughter pointing excitedly at a designer purse. The female associate who once accused him stepped up to assist them with a gracious smile. Marcus caught her eye, and for a brief second, they locked gazes. She gave him a slight nod, a wordless acknowledgement, perhaps a silent second apology. He nodded back, a sense of closure settling in his chest. Stepping back out into the rainy street, Marcus flipped up the hood of his sweater and breathed in the cool night air. The neon reflections of car headlights shimmered in puddles by the curb. He remembered the day he'd first walked into Fioravant's with a pounding heart, unsure if anyone would even give him the time of day. He recalled the humiliation, the anger, and the resilience that followed. Now, that same store displayed his creations, elevating them as a beacon of talent and innovation. The moral lesson wasn't just about perseverance or staying true to one's dreams, though those were crucial. It was also about how people could change. Fioravant's staff had once seen Marcus as an outsider to be suspected. Now, they regarded him as a valuable collaborator. Prejudice was a formidable foe, but it wasn't unbeatable. Through empathy, exposure, and shared success, walls could come down. As Marcus Gray walked toward the subway station, he couldn't help but feel both humbled and hopeful. He was living proof that, in the face of judgment, a person's determination could turn doubt into opportunity. And somewhere in the corridors of Fioravant's, staff who once dismissed him were now learning the same lesson. Never judge a book by its cover, or a man by the color of his skin. One individual's resilience had ignited a shift, however small, in a high-end boutique perched in the heart of a bustling city. It was a step forward, and for Marcus, that single step was just the beginning of a much larger journey. He smiled to himself, tucking his hands in his pockets as rain continued to fall. There was more work to do, more designs to create, and more barriers to break. But for tonight, he allowed himself to revel in the triumph. He had walked into a luxury store as an outsider, and walked out an honored guest, a collaborator, and a rising star. And in the end, he had gifted the staff an unforgettable lesson. Never underestimate the potential of someone who walks through your doors with a dream and an unwavering sense of purpose.